Welcome Internet to Psychoanalytic Talk, and today we're going to talk about healthy masochism, a very interesting concept that Otto Kernberg developed in Love Relations in the chapter 9, Masochistic Pathology. So before he delves in deep into what is masochism, he reminds the reader in this chapter that it's a wide spectrum of behaviors that can be considered masochistic, a wide range of states of being. And in that wide range, there is this, at the very top, healthy masochism, a concept that sticks in my mind as it is not commonly referred to as such, but for Kernberg, it is a very important dimension. So, une fois n'étant pas coutume, as we would say in French, which means one time is not a habit, I'm going to read the extract, as it's virtually just one paragraph, and I find it jam-packed of ideas, so I think it's very valuable. So I'll read it to you now. At the other extreme, a healthy capacity for self-sacrifice on the behalf of the family, others, or an ideal, the sublimatory functions of the superego, determined willingness to suffer, does not warrant being considered pathological. Our prolonged infantile dependency at the necessary infantilization of parental authority during our protracted childhood and adolescence makes it almost impossible to conceive of a superego which would not include masochistic components. That is, some unconsciously motivated need for suffering and its underlying dynamics. So, very simply, Otto Kernberg shows us that masochism is an inevitability, i.e., it's going to happen regardless. Because how it happens is that, as he says in this paragraph, because of our form of dependency on the adult as early infants, and that we have to submit to authority, even in well-structured personalities, there's still a moment where basically we have to obey the laws, the rules of any society. And that obedience in of itself forges a form of masochism in the individual. But it's a masochism that is important because it's also a show of adaptation. Because if one was fully non-masochistic, right, completely non-masochistic, there would be no renunciation, no giving up, or no respect of the law if it intertwined with a pleasure principle. Meaning that basically there's a necessary form of submission. And I don't think it's a bad idea. I think quite the opposite. It's a very important idea that explains why basically sometimes we basically go against our best interests for the collective, for others. And I also think it explains very well certain acts of, for example, gratitude. That, for example, let's say you're going to leave your metro seat to an elderly gentleman. It's because basically, it is a form of gratitude towards a parental figure, but it's also a form of masochism because you are giving up a pleasure, i.e. sitting down, for someone else. And I am not saying, and this is important, that it's a bad thing. I think quite the opposite. I think it's a very, very important and powerful element to be able to have that form of masochism. And he also points out to masochism as basically intertwined with the superego, which is a concept that I find very, very relevant, as fundamentally the superego is a repressive part of the mind. Basically, it goes against our hedonistic needs and wants, right? So basically something inside of us is pushing ourselves down and trying to basically prevent it because of threats of punishment. And to an extent, it forces a certain form of masochism to go with that superego or to agree with it, even though it's not absolute, right? And that's what I find very interesting, because at the core, when we think about it, every action of basically waiting or being kind or basically giving up something that we have could be seen as a form of masochism, which I think is very true, that something in ourselves gives up, renounces, And in that we accept a certain level, right, of suffering. A normal level, mind you, but still a level. And this I find very important because I think often masochism is pushed directly into this camp of psychopathology, i.e. it's something pathological that one needs to work to cure or heal. But we never talk about how I can be so adapted and so important, not just for society, right, but also for the individual. Because there's also a certain form of necessity to give up. Because if you don't give up, then basically the potential stays king and the ideal becomes crushing. It's not the ideal as he states here in the definition, right? Because it's important to have ideals. For example, it's important to aim to something, to try and do the best one can. For example, staying up late at night to end your thesis, let's say. It's a form of masochism, but it's important because it's for your future. But it's not the ideal that I was now talking about. Something crashing, something that basically does not allow anything to go unfulfilled. And that creates in of itself another form of masochism, but a more vicious one, in which basically the individual is severely punished, whereas the other form of masochism is slight, it's manageable. And I think that that's one of the key elements of normal masochism, or let's say healthy masochism, as Kernberg says, is that it allows us to manage a certain level of suffering and to agree with it, for it to be okay, ego-syntonic, i.e. we are okay with it. We are even sometimes glad that we are able to renounce and in a way help others even if it implies our suffering, in a way or in another. And I think that this is very important because at the core, masochism is, I think, a very interesting and nuanced concept that has lost a lot of its nuance through professional discourse, and that we directly envisage moral masochism, i.e. suffering for suffering's sake, or sexual masochism, i.e. excitement in suffering. But we do never see it as just a normal part of personality, and even a healthy part of personality. And I think that's why it's so incredible that he was able to state that in a very succinct manner, right? It's a very short definition, yet so pertinent to basically clinical phenomena. And so important because I think that a lot of people have self-defeating purposes, i.e. feelings of, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that, why did I do this, why did I do that? And understanding that this is part of collective masochism is important, and it's good, because I think that too many times the superego can become cruel and unfair. And understanding that there is a compromise to be had between that cruelty and not caring at all, that this is a middle ground through also guilt, because it's also that a healthy superego and a healthy ego can deal with guilt. But that guilt is also, and this is where we go back to the definition, a form of healthy masochism when it's not extreme, that you can like self-reflect, think about what has happened. And that thinking is not always pleasurable, but it's important for one's growth, for one's extension, for one's basically development at any age, right? Not just in childhood, but even during adulthood. But that cannot come if one does not confront or accept the guilt, the masochistic elements of that guilt. And I think that this is very important. And it's something that also helps us at an interpersonal level, i.e. our relationships with other people. Basically are at peace when there's some form of masochism, when you accept to give ground, not completely, right, not like you're accepting to completely self-sacrifice, but a bit of self-sacrifice goes a long way to help relationships. If the other one can also give a bit of self-sacrifice, that it's a compromise. And I think that this is what Kernberg in a way points out, that healthy masochism helps us compromise with ourselves, our ideal, our superego, but also with others. That it basically helps us on many levels and that it's healthy. and that in a way it's a good usage of the masochistic tendencies that we all collectively have. And it's when it becomes basically not a source of compromise but the superimposition that it becomes pathological, i.e. when it becomes extreme, intense, and when the person does not manage it, when there's no more pleasure, when there's no more interpersonal help through that masochism, that it becomes a problem. And obviously it also depends on the type of masochism we're talking about. But when it becomes pathological, it becomes pain, and pain-inducing, that it's not manageable, it's no longer compromise. And I think that's important to point it out. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I will give the complete quotation of the paragraph in the description. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.